Elena Voss stood at the edge of the grand hall, her hands folded in front of her face calm even though her heart was pounding. Around her, 12 packs had gathered for the Alliance Summit, the biggest meeting of the year. Alphas from every corner of the land had come, along with their advisors, their warriors, and their families. The hall was filled with the low murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter from groups who had already begun celebrating old friendships. At the center of it all sat Damian Cross, the Alpha King. He was tall, strong, and commanding, with dark eyes that could silence a room with a single glance. 3 years ago, he had chosen Elena as his intended mate, not because he loved her, but because uniting with her family's smaller pack had once seemed useful to him. Back then, Elena had been young and hopeful. She had believed that respect could grow into something real, even if love did not come first. But 3 years had taught her otherwise. Damian had never truly accepted her. He spoke to her with a tone that hovered somewhere between boredom and irritation. He canceled plans without explanation. He let his council members mock her in subtle ways, and he never once stepped in to defend her. Elena had told herself, again and again, that it would get better, that patience was a virtue, that maybe, someday, he would see her as more than a political tool. Tonight, all of that ended. Damian stood at the front of the hall, raising his goblet to address the crowd. The room quieted as he began to speak about strength, unity, and the importance of choosing the right allies for the future. Elena listened politely, the way she always did, until his words took a turn she did not expect. "A leader must never settle," Damian said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Loyalty is important, but strength must come first. Sometimes, what we once thought was enough turns out to be replaceable." He did not look at Elena when he said it, but everyone in the hall did. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Some alphas exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others smirked, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. Elena felt her face grow warm, not with embarrassment, but with something colder and steadier, something that felt like clarity. She realized, in that single moment, that she had spent 3 years hoping for a man who had already made up his mind about her worth. And his answer was clear enough now, spoken in front of 12 packs, without hesitation or apology. Elena did not shout, she did not cry. She simply reached up, unclasped the mating pendant from around her neck, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. The small sound of metal touching wood seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed. "Thank you for making that clear," she said, her voice steady. "I won't take up any more of your time." Then she turned and walked out of the hall, her footsteps calm and unhurried, as if she were simply stepping out for fresh air, rather than leaving behind 3 years of her life. Damian did not call after her. He assumed, perhaps, that she would come back once her pride settled. He was wrong. What Damian did not know, and what Elena herself had only recently begun to understand, was that her family's bloodline was far older and far more significant than anyone realized. Buried deep in ancient records, kept quiet by her grandmother for decades, was the truth that Elena was a descendant of the first moon line, the founding wolves whose blood had given rise to every alpha's power in the current age. It was a lineage so old that most packs believed it to be nothing more than legend. Elena's grandmother had always told her stories about the first moon line before she passed away, stories about strength that did not come from force, but from balance, patience, and fairness. At the time, Elena had thought they were simply bedtime stories, ways to comfort a lonely child. She never imagined they might be true. But word of what happened at the summit spread quickly, as gossip always does among packs who thrive on alliances and rivalries. Within days, scholars and pack historians, who had heard whispers of Elena's lineage, began digging through old records. They found forgotten documents, family trees, and symbols that matched the ancient markings of the first moon line. The truth became impossible to ignore. Elena was not simply a rejected almost queen. She was, by ancient law, someone whose bloodline could grant extraordinary authority to whichever pack she chose to join. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Alphas who had once looked past her, who had barely acknowledged her presence at gatherings, suddenly found reasons to visit her. Messages arrived at her small cottage on the outskirts of her family's old territory, some polite and formal, others bold and direct. Within 2 weeks, Elena had received offers from 5 different packs, each one promising something different: land, protection, status, or partnership. Alpha Kieran of the Frostbound pack was the first to arrive in person. He was a quiet, thoughtful leader, known for his fairness and his careful approach to decisions. He did not bring gifts or grand declarations. Instead, he sat with Elena at her kitchen table and asked her questions about what she wanted, not what her bloodline could offer him. "I'm not here because of legends," he told her honestly. "I'm here because I've heard how you carry yourself, even when people underestimated you. That matters more to me than old bloodlines." Elena appreciated his honesty, though she remained cautious. She had learned the hard way that words could be carefully chosen to sound sincere. Not long after, Alpha Renzo of the Ember Pack arrived with a different approach entirely. He was passionate and outspoken, known for challenging outdated traditions within his own pack. He told Elena that if she joined him, he would use her lineage to abolish the old laws that forced mates together for political gain, the very laws that had trapped her with Damien in the first place. "You could change everything," Renzo said, his eyes bright with conviction, "not just for yourself, but for every young wolf who gets told who to love and who to serve." His offer was tempting, not because of power, but because of purpose. Elena had spent years feeling like a pawn in someone else's plans. The idea of dismantling that system entirely stirred something deep within her. Meanwhile, word of the growing attention around Elena reached Damien. At first, he dismissed it as foolish rumors, unwilling to believe that the woman he had so easily set aside could suddenly become the center of such fierce competition. But as more alphas openly courted her, as council members from his own pack began questioning his judgment, Damien's dismissiveness turned into something closer to panic. He arrived at Elena's territory 3 weeks after the summit, uninvited and unannounced. The guards at the border, wolves who had once served under her family but now proudly called themselves her own, stopped him before he could go any further. "I need to speak with Elena," Damien said, his usual confidence faltering slightly under their unwavering stares. "She has nothing to say to you," one of the guards replied simply. Damien tried again the next day, and the day after that, but each time he was turned away. Word of his repeated attempts spread just as quickly as everything else, and rather than making him look powerful, it made him look desperate. The Alpha King, who had once declared Elena replaceable in front of 12 packs, was now the one being replaced in the eyes of his peers. Elena, for her part, tried to stay grounded amid the chaos. She spent long hours walking through the quiet forests near her cottage, thinking not about power or politics, but about what kind of life she truly wanted. She thought about her grandmother's stories, about balance and fairness rather than dominance. She thought about the years she had spent shrinking herself to fit into a role that was never meant for her. She met with each alpha who came to her, listening carefully, asking questions, and paying close attention not just to what they said, but to how they treated the people around them. She watched how they spoke to their own pack members, how they handled disagreements, and whether their kindness extended beyond the moments when they knew she was watching. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. Kieran was steady and respectful, but somewhat reserved, as if he still saw her lineage as the primary reason for his interest, even if he tried not to show it. Renzo was passionate and sincere, but his eagerness to use her bloodline for sweeping change sometimes overshadowed the fact that he barely knew her as a person. Other alphas who approached her were more transparent about their ambitions, seeing her simply as a path to greater influence. But there was one pack that stood apart from the rest, not because its alpha pursued her aggressively, but because he barely pursued her at all. Alpha Soren, of the smaller, quieter Hollowbrook pack, had been at the summit the night Damien humiliated her. Unlike the others, he had not waited for news of her lineage to reach him before showing kindness. That very night, as Elena walked out of the hall, Soren had quietly followed a few steps behind, not to stop her, but to make sure she made it safely to her carriage. He said nothing about her lineage, because at the time, he did not know about it. He simply saw a woman who had been publicly disrespected, and wanted to make sure she was not left alone in the dark. In the weeks that followed, Soren did not send messengers with grand promises. He sent a single letter, asking if she was doing well, with no mention of alliances or bloodlines at all. When Elena finally visited Hollowbrook Pack herself, curious about the Alpha who had shown her kindness before anyone knew her worth, she found a community that felt different from the others. The pack members greeted each other with warmth rather than formality. Disagreements were settled through discussion rather than dominance. Soren himself listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were thoughtful rather than persuasive. "I'm not asking you to choose me because of what your bloodline can offer," Soren told her one evening, as they sat together near a quiet lake at the edge of his territory. "I'm asking you to consider Hollowbrook because I think you'd be respected here, lineage or not." For the first time since the summit, Elena felt something shift inside her, not the pressure of expectation, but the quiet comfort of being seen simply as herself. Weeks turned into a season, and eventually, the pressure from other packs reached a boiling point. Rivalries that had once been carefully managed through diplomacy began to fray, as alphas competed more openly for Elena's favor. Tensions rose at gatherings, alliances shifted. The old order that had once seemed unshakable began to show cracks. Recognizing that the situation could no longer continue without resolution, the Council of 12, the governing body overseeing all the packs, called for a formal gathering. Elena was invited to speak, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone whose decision would shape the future of pack relations for generations to come. Standing before the assembled alphas, including Damien, who sat rigid and silent near the back of the hall, Elena spoke with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "For years, I believed that my worth depended on being chosen," she began. "I built my sense of self around the approval of someone who never truly valued me. When I walked away from that, I did not expect the world to suddenly compete for my attention. But it did, and in that competition, I learned something important." She paused, letting her gaze move slowly across the room. "None of you owe me a crown, and I do not owe any of you loyalty, simply because of the blood in my veins. What I choose now, I choose because it aligns with the kind of future I want to help build. One where alliances are formed through respect, not obligation." She then announced her decision to join Hollowbrook Pack, not as a prize to be claimed, but as an equal partner in leadership, working alongside Soren to reshape outdated traditions that had trapped generations of young wolves into unwanted alliances. The hall was silent for a long moment, before scattered applause began to grow. Even some of the alphas who had hoped to win her favor found themselves nodding in quiet respect, recognizing the wisdom in her words rather than the disappointment of losing a political opportunity. Damien remained silent throughout, his expression unreadable. When the gathering ended and the hall began to empty, he approached Elena one final time, his usual confidence replaced by something closer to humility. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I let pride cloud my judgment, and I lost something valuable because of it." Elena studied him for a moment, feeling neither anger nor triumph, only a calm sense of closure. "You didn't lose me because of pride alone," she said gently. "You lost me because you never truly tried to know me. I hope, for your sake, you learn that lesson before it costs you something else." With that, she turned and walked away, not out of anger this time, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understood her own worth. In the seasons that followed, Elena and Soren worked together to slowly change the old laws that had once bound so many wolves into unhappy alliances. Their partnership was not built on grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but on daily choices to listen, to respect, and to lead with fairness. Hollowbrook Pack grew stronger, not through conquest, but through trust, becoming a model that other packs slowly began to follow. And Elena, once dismissed as replaceable by the very man who was supposed to value her most, became known throughout the land not as a queen who was fought over, but as a leader who had chosen her own path, proving that true worth was never something to be given by others. It was something to be recognized within oneself, long before anyone else ever noticed it at all.